G'day, it's your old mate Matthew here from the Yarnsman. Welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. Very excited about the episode with Mark Bowen today. He's a good friend of mine. We get into a few different topics, including suicide. So if you do find that triggering, feel free to step away or check our website for support. Hope you enjoy it. Good morning and welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. This morning we've got Mark Bowen here. Now, it's really hard for me to introduce Mark because I've known him for quite some time, but he's a father, he's a husband, he's been a mentor advisor to me, an ex-boss. I'm not actually sure if he's on the Grammar Honours Board, but he does one hell of a turkey impersonation. Good morning, Mark, how are you?
Matthew, I'm very well. It's great to have you in my kitchen this morning, and looking forward to catching up for one of your latest podcasts.
Yeah, cool. Well, is there anything else you wanted to add to the intro?
No, that was perfect. I don't think anyone has ever introduced me more succinctly as you have just done. Thank you.
I spent my shower time this morning was thinking about you and how I was going to introduce you. Well, we'll jump into it then, mate. What have you struggled with in the last week?
Yeah, it's a good question and a good one for guys in particular to reflect on. I think for me, I've had something that's been quite triggering in the last week, so last few days actually. A guy that I used to play cricket with passed away, and as blokes we're generally pretty terrible at dealing with that. But for me, I'm of a vintage now where things like melanoma, heart attack, suicide, I'm in the sort of prime catchment area for that, and so no longer do I find myself just looking at my parents' generation and seeing poor old Ethel fall off her rocker, but I'm seeing my friends pass away. So yeah, pretty triggering. It brought back memories of another friend of mine who, and I'm sorry to start on such a somber note, but I had another friend who I grew up with, played a lot of football with, who died of cancer several years ago, and sitting in the hospice with him, watching him take his last breath was pretty traumatic. There was a group of us, a group of guys that had played football since we were kids, really, and so that was pretty triggering. So having this event happen again this week for me has been something that I've been working through. It doesn't get any easier, but it does. I found myself thinking a lot around Matthew Bell, who was the name of the guy who passed away. He came to my 21st. He actually, I send out invitations as you do to your 21st, and I'd written on it. He had a brother as well, Matt and Andrew, and I'd written on the invitation Matt with just one T. And he's the only person that turned up to the 21st with the invitation, and he'd scribbled something on it and he handed back my invitation as he walked in the door, and I looked at it and it just said, you stand on a mat with a T, but you party with a mat, double T. And so those sorts of things are the things that you end up kind of thinking about. So whilst it really sad that we've lost Matt, I guess, you start, it brings up a whole lot of memories and you end up gravitating towards the ones that were really amusing.
Well, yeah, I mean, to finish, that's a positive way to finish, and sorry that's happened, and thank you for sharing, because it's about creating vulnerability and talking about it. It's one of the challenges of males of not talking about it, not knowing what to do. And just to be clear, I'm a Matthew with two T's. If anyone, I don't think you can trust someone with one T.
Good.
So looking ahead to the next week, what's something you want to work on?
So this is something I'm working on constantly at the moment. So week to week is just being really clear around trying to find balance every week. As you will know, Matthew, trying to catch up with me and pin me down for this has been somewhat of a challenge. So I travel a bit for work, so I'm typically away 3 days every week. I've got a young family, 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, who are just sort of getting into their Saturday morning sports. They have week sport as well. Trying to support my wife. There's a lot of things that you try and find balance with. I've got elderly parents in Auckland as well as my sister and her family. So trying to find balance across all of those things is a constant challenge. And I can always sort of find when I'm slipping a little bit. Mm-hmm. For every week for me, it's about just making sure I have the appropriate amount of time and saying no to things, so that you're not burning yourself out is a real key piece that I'm constantly working on.
Yeah, I think that is real key, and it is more of a long-term journey, and I think we hear that a lot of the, just trying to get balance and going back to what's important, and you've got a lot going on. You spin a few plates.
Yeah.
What are you proud of?
That's a funny one. I literally do hate talking about myself. So this is like, I looked at the question and I kind of went, oh, what am I proud of? There's a lot of things I guess I'm reflectively proud of. I was a half decent sportsman, so I'm proud of what I did many years ago on the sports field. It's pretty hard for me currently to look past my family, my two girls, my wife, my dog, who's wandering around here somewhere, and I'm really proud of them and what we've created for ourselves as a tight family unit. I think probably the thing I'm most proud of though is figuring out myself, and it took a long time. In my 20s and 30s, I'd say, well, teenage years, 20s and 30s, I didn't know myself. I literally didn't. So it took me a long time to figure out what triggered me, what drove me. I talked before about managing energy levels. It took a long time for me to actually get to a point where I could recognise the path I was going down around running out of energy. I'll probably describe myself, my work ethic as somewhat manic. I would push myself very hard until I basically hit the wall, and then I'd just drop. I think the thing I'm most proud of is getting a better understanding of me, understanding what makes me tick, understanding what makes me happy, ensuring that I have the things in my day and in my week that actually give back to me, but also manage my time. I say to my team at work, as a people leader, I've got about probably 2 to 3 hours of energy in me every day. My personality type is a extroverted introvert. So if you see me in that 2 to 3 hour window, you will see me as potentially quite an extrovert. But what you won't see is for the remaining 21 hours in the day, I need to go into my cave and actually re-energize, and I re-energize by having time by myself. So understanding that and sort of managing that through has been something I'm probably most proud of.
Yeah, it's good. And I suppose, do you think you needed to have gone through, we're going a bit off script here, but do you think you needed to have gone through some personal challenges to really understand that? Or do you think that's just, by getting a bit longer in the tooth?
Well, I think I'm probably quite typical of most males, and certainly most Kiwi males. I bottled everything up. I didn't talk to anybody, and particularly growing up as a young man in the 80s and 90s, we had a terrible culture amongst men where you were labelled if you tried to show any sort of vulnerability, any sort of crack, or in the veneer, and people jumped on that pretty quickly. It was pretty brutal. What has really pleased me, having a broad range of friends now, young, older. What I'm seeing in New Zealand in particular with younger men coming through is that they are way more open, they're way more emotionally connected, and they're not afraid to show that with their friends as well. And I think that's been, that's a really cool thing to see. But for me, I think probably what would have helped my progress, understanding myself better and earlier, would have been being open to talking to people about it. Right?
Having a yarn.
Having a yarn. Now, whether that's with mates, or whether it's actually going to see a professional. Again, growing up in the 80s and 90s, you kind of had that, taboo of, you're not going to go and see a quack, are you? What's wrong with you? But actually talking about it helps a lot. And I think, it's a great thing that you're doing here with this whole yarns piece, right, is getting guys talking about this stuff. And the more people hear other people's stories and they understand, they go, okay, right, I can relate to that. I can, that totally resonates with me. Hopefully breaks down more of those kind of barriers. But I think my vintage, so for clarity, 50. So in my sort of 50 to 60, even people older than that, I grew up in an age where it wasn't cool, it wasn't okay, and it certainly wasn't encouraged to open up about how you felt, right? And
it certainly wasn't in my high school years, right? And which was just a bit beyond yours, but sorry, a bit sooner.
It was the same decade, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Decades.
So millennia, but century. Sorry, carry on.
No. So look, that's pretty much it. Yeah, if I'd maybe reached out earlier and looked for some help, There are a bunch of things that I know I would have benefited from. And look, I think also I owe a lot to my wife in that regards, in terms of, normalising being able to speak to someone about something. Not going in with what my sounding board up until then had been blokes who are like, "Really, I'm not going to talk about that." Whereas having a female point of view, females are very different to men in that regard. They like to kind of talk things through. You kind of get a sense of, oh shit, if we actually do that, maybe it'll actually help us too.
I've got to go off piece again, but have you brought that approach into the workplace?
Yeah, I think having open communication and showing vulnerability from the top is important. I shared with my team when I stepped into my people leadership role. So just for context, I lead 3 different teams, totally about 28 people in total. And when I first stepped into that role, I spent a whole session just unpacking a little bit of me, Mark 101, if you like, sharing a taonga, so something that was really special to me, and for my team, it was actually hearing. I had a little picture which I've carried with me for a long time. In fact, I'll get it for you now, Matthew. So, for those who obviously can't see this, it's a very small, probably 2-inch by 2-inch portrait of One Tree Hill, which so I grew up at the base of One Tree Hill when it did actually have a tree. And when I travelled everywhere, I took this picture with me, and so it always made me feel very grounded. Lived overseas for 10 years. When I came back to New Zealand, the very first place I would always go was the top of One Tree Hill, and from the top of One Tree Hill I could see not only Onehunga, where my family were from, so my grandfather, my mother was raised there, family home was there for a long time, but also I could see over the cricket club that I was very passionate about. I could see my football club, I could see the schools that I went to, and also more latterly where my grandfather's ashes were spread. So I spent a lot of time as a kid up there doing my best thinking, and it's always been something that's been really grounded. So sharing that with my team allowed them to get a better sense of me, and I think it allowed others to feel more comfortable about then opening up as well.
I love that. And I mean, I didn't know about this. You haven't always got it out. We'll get back on track there. Not that, I mean, this is all interesting. What gives you hope?
Look, it's hard for me not to, as a father, proud father, to not talk about my kids. So when I talk about hope, I know there's a lot of things at the moment. If you look around in the world, if you look at conflict that exists, people's fear about the impact of social media, positive and negative, digital. We're living in a digital age where, growing up as a kid, if you got bullied at school, you get a bit of a punch in the arm, but then you got home and you got a bit of a reprieve. Now, kids come home from school, they don't really kind of have that reprieve. So there's lots of stuff that you could worry about. But I look at my 2 girls at 7 and 9, and just their openness and their untarnished, I guess, by some of the evils of the world, and that gives me hope. They approach everything with a positive, open mindset, and even the little challenges that they encounter, watching them sort of overcome them. We had one of the youngest girl actually, school cross country champs at school a couple of weeks ago, and she got herself all wound up about competing in a race, and then actually seeing her live that experience of, hey, how do I deal with this anxiety and this sort of tension, to the event itself. And look, she did okay, but then afterwards she was absolutely stoked. She came home beaming. She came 4th, and for her that was actually a really great outcome. So you look at that, and regardless of everything else going on in the world, I see my kids and I see them interacting with their friends, nice bunch of friends that they've got, and you kind of go, that gives me hope, right? It's not all doom and gloom, right? I'm a firm believer that you've got to find a reason to be happy. We're here, as my grandfather used to say, you're here 70. So why waste time, being negative about things? You've got to see hope. You've got to see the upside of everything, because the mind is a powerful thing. One of the things, again, I've learned probably over the last couple of years is that things will happen to you through your day that you have no control over. But the one thing you do have control over is how you react to those and the mental approach you take to them. So taking a positive spin, seeing the positive in every situation wherever you can, and we all have to deal with some pretty nasty things at times, but how you deal with that is a reflection on you and how you want to live your life.
Some very sage advice. That's why it's been good having you in my corner through my career in life. So moving into the second part, the more meaty question, and I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation given, we were both going through a challenge and at the same time and in the same workplace and didn't really know about it. But tell us about that time that you were struggling, and we can dive into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I lived in London for 10 years, and during that time got married. That marriage didn't last, unfortunately, and so I came back to New Zealand pretty unsure as to where I was going next, and so I sort of threw myself into work and kind of narrowed down my world. So I maybe stripped out all the things that I really enjoyed in life and kind of just focused in on work, which was a big mistake. But I really struggled with the concept of having failed at something. Particularly something with, you imagine everyone goes into their first marriage expecting it to be their one and only. You get your best friends and family there, it's a big day in front of everybody, you're declaring this is going to be great, and for me, like within 6 months that was over. And so I think initially my pride took a big hit, and then I came back to New Zealand. And I just couldn't find a rhythm, and I was really struggling. So as I said, I buried myself in work. And I think probably what triggered my event was I was flatting with one of my best mates in Grey Lynn. And we had a very nice landlord, but the landlord's sister was coming back from the UK, so we were told, hey, look, you've got to move out. Now, my best friend had been in that flat for probably close to 10 years. Sure. So it had been a sort of a steady base, but then all of a sudden to realise that a core part of how you feel secure in life, having a place to come home to that you know is yours, that was gone, and that kind of almost put me into free fall. And so I didn't have a steady place that was mine. We eventually found another flat, but again, the anxiety in me at that stage was that this will happen again. There's no way to kind of lock this in. I'd sort of kind of got into a spiral of just not having any clear plan in life. I was just buried in this hole, and I got to the point where I just couldn't see a way out. I didn't know what to do next, and it's probably bit of a challenge talking about this, but I got to the point where for me I didn't see a way out, and I didn't have anywhere to kind of lean on or go to that could help me through that, and so I decided I was going to take my own life. So in our flat, I reversed my car into the garage and left the engine running, and I can still remember the music I was playing in the car, and I could feel myself going, like I was getting to that stage where it wasn't too far off, and the thought that came to me in that time was actually I lived with my best friend, one of my best friends. He was going to come home and find me, and there was that one little glimmer when the lights were getting close to going out fully that made me go, what sort of friend am I? Who does that to a best mate? Like I can't have him come home and find me like this. So it must have seemed like a bit of a Cheech and Chong scene. I opened up. I remember I reached for the remote control on the garage door opener and opened up, and all the fumes, smoke, everything sort of kind of went up. And it actually took me a couple of days to tell my mate. Like we actually, I remember going. It was over sort of a Christmas New Year period, and we ended up going to the races. And I knew he knew that there was something that wasn't quite right, but he hadn't known how to kind of approach it. And I just levelled with him at the races, and I think for him it was like a thunderbolt. It was like, holy shit, we were actually pretty close to to losing me. And it was actually from that moment that I kind of pieced myself together over the next week and said, actually, I need to take control of my life. I lost, realistically, I lost probably 10 years of my life trying to deal with the breakup of my marriage. And it was tough, but the first thing I wanted to do was I needed to address the situation with not having a stable base. So sat down with my mum actually, who had recently inherited some money, and said, look, I need to get onto the property ladder. I can't do it by myself. I swallowed a bit of pride and said, Mum, can you help support me in that journey? Which she was happy to do. I would never have got onto the property ladder without her. We bought a place together in New Lynn, which was great, and then that kind of gave me a bit more security. Felt really good about that. I had a wise old gentleman say that, hey, look, if you're looking for a partner in life, first thing you do is buy a house and watch them come in after that. It was literally, I think we settled on the house that I purchased, I think it might have been in like June or July, and in August I met my current wife, and from there we've meticulously planned all of our moves, and I guess the good news story to come out of all of this now is that I'll have been married to my wife for 10 years in January. We've got 2 beautiful girls. We live in our dream house here in Christchurch. We made a bold decision to move from Auckland to Christchurch. We relocated, and I now feel totally in control of where my life has gone from there. But I look back and I often have moments where I'll just go, it could have been really different. And again, for context, only a year or two after my incident, my first cousin, took his own life. And so, for me, New Zealand has a lot of work to do in terms of supporting mental health, particularly male mental health. And I was one of the lucky ones that managed to find a way through. But I found a way through. I guess the point I'd probably call out is that it was the thought for me of what impact it would have on my friend. That was the thing that actually stopped me.
Yeah, well, it's, I mean...
That's deep.
It is a fantastic story because it shows, well, I'm so glad you're still here because you mean a lot to me. There's a couple of questions I want to follow on questions. You said you didn't have anyone to talk to. In hindsight, do you still think that's the case? Or was it? Sorry, let me ask a part 2 to that. Or was it that you didn't know how?
I think when you're stuck in a hole, it's really hard to know who to go to. And for context again, I'd set up 10 years of my life in London. A lot of my, I went there when I was 22, from 22 to 32. So a lot of the friends that I made in that time frame were left back in the UK. So I came back to New Zealand, and whilst I was reconnecting with friends and making, new friends, I didn't have anybody who was kind of like a trusted advisor, if you like. So it was really hard for me to kind of know where to go. And so it felt like there was no one. I mean, of course, there were people that would have happily talked to me, but it's not something that I'd ever done. And I think also in my own mind, I don't know that I could have articulated what the issue was. I knew that something wasn't right, but I couldn't sit down and say, I'm feeling this way because of it was the breakup of a marriage. It was the sense of failure. It was a feeling that I had no control over my life. I didn't have a strong base. All those sorts of things. And so being able to kind of get those set in your own head at the time without having an established open line of communication with someone was probably the challenge.
Yeah, I certainly echo all those things. For me, it was always making sure I had a solid base. My London, I had the same flat for 7 years, which is outrageous, right? But that was my safe space with all the other things going on. What advice would you have to people now that may be in that place where they can't piece together exactly what why the reason they're feeling rubbish is or whatever?
Yeah, it's a hard one because it is deeply personal, right? And everybody's different. I don't know. I think probably in the first instance, encouraging things like this are really good. So males being able to see that other males can talk to each other openly about how they're feeling is a good thing. The more we see of that, the better. but I think you know, have that one person or maybe a couple of people that you share stuff with, and I know, you know, it's probably, you know, for some people they'll look around their circle of friends, and they might be friends for a whole lot of different reasons. They might be the people they played sport with, they might be the people they go out drinking with, they might be the mate that they had since primary school. You know, I think if you look at critically some of the connections there, someone might be a great friend, but how often do you have those honest conversations with them? You know, I always look at people who potentially threaten the nature of a friendship by, for lack of a better term, staging an intervention, right? Like that. It takes a really strong friend to trust the relationship enough to sit down with someone and say, hey, look, you know, maybe not sitting down and saying we're staging an intervention, but actually saying, hey, look, do you realise, you know, for argument's sake, you know, you're partying a bit too much. You know, do you realise that you're drinking a lot recently? You know, I've noticed that you've really gone into your shell. You know, tell me about that. I think quite often people kind of get lost in that. Well, let's just kind of get through our own day and not really think about that. But I think having at least one person or maybe a couple of people that you can talk to and that you mutually share stuff with, I think makes it easier. The biggest taboo for most people is that they don't want to appear vulnerable. They don't want to appear as, you know what, I've got a problem. You know, they may not even know that they've got a problem.
And the other thing there is people not wanting to upset the apple cart and not wanting confrontation, whereas, yeah, I'm a massive fan in trying to have your emergency contacts, right? If you're, you know, standing on the edge of a cliff, there's people you can call. Well, I'd hope that you could do that you know, beforehand. And I guess part of what we're trying to do here is create that space where we can have all these conversations, so there won't be a need for that. But there's still a way to go and create, allowing people to be vulnerable and creating that space where people can be vulnerable, right?
Totally.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, that's all some really fantastic stuff. I think thank you so much for sharing your journey. Well, I say it's fantastic. You've been vulnerable, you've shared your story. So thank you so much for being you.
Hey, look, pleasure, Matthew. And hopefully what we've talked about today, you know, hopefully there's some nuggets in there for people. You know, I think, you know, a big part, particularly as I've got older, is that you need people that are comfortable putting themselves out there, or at least brave enough to do that, so that others can kind of find a piece that they tie in with. And if, you know, if one person listening to this picks up on a thread that resonates with them, then yeah, that's a powerful thing.